Just 15 minutes ago, the cold silence of the British winter was shattered by a revelation that no one at Buckingham Palace saw coming. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, has finally stepped out of the shadows to expose the raw, unfiltered truth about the day he was forbidden from entering Sandringham, the very place where his father, King Charles, lay struggling against a deteriorating health crisis. This wasn't just a royal snub. It was a clinical, calculated exclusion that has ripped the gilded mask off the monarchy's face once and for all. For years, the public has been fed a steady diet of royal duty and family unity. But tonight, Harry has confirmed what many long suspected, that behind those palace walls, image matters more than blood, and optics carry more weight than a son's love. The world watched in disbelief as Harry detailed the moment his plane touched down in the UK, only to be met not with a father's embrace, but with a wall of cold, unyielding protocol. He described the scene at the gates of Sandringham with a level of raw distress that we haven't seen since the days of Princess Diana. Harry spoke of trembling hands and a fractured trust, revealing that it wasn't King Charles who barred the door, but a system, a palace machine, that had decided a rogue prince was a greater threat than a dying king's isolation. The revelation changes everything we thought we knew about the current royal power struggle. This wasn't about privacy or space for recovery, as the official statements claimed. This was a monarchical containment protocol designed to silence the one person who refused to play by the palace's rules. As Harry's words echo across the Atlantic, the question that thunders louder than the rest is, why? Why was a son forbidden from his father's bedside at his most vulnerable hour? Harry claims he has the medical files, the recorded calls, and the names of the senior aides who told him that time is no longer on our side, while simultaneously locking him out. The illusion of control has crumbled, and what remains is a heartbreaking confession of a family walking on a crumbling bridge. This is the beginning of the reckoning Charles always feared, a legacy sealed not in ink, but in betrayal. Behind the polished facade of the royal estate, a secret war was being waged, and the casualties were more than just protocols. Prince Harry has now revealed that while the public was being fed generic health updates, a confidential medical report was being circulated among a hand-picked few in sealed envelopes. This report, so devastating it never left the hands of senior royals, allegedly contained the true diagnosis, a condition far more aggressive than the palace was willing to admit. Harry's exclusion from Sandringham wasn't a simple family disagreement. It was a tactical maneuver by what he calls the Camilla blockade, a calculated campaign designed to manage the optics of the king's deterioration. According to internal whispers now confirmed by Harry, the Queen Consort allegedly ordered communication staff to ensure no unacceptable distractions would reach the king's private quarters. In the eyes of the palace machine, Harry was the ultimate distraction, a rogue element that could disrupt the carefully choreographed narrative of stability. While King Charles was struggling with what physicians documented as an aggressive neurological disorder paired with cardiac complications, the palace was reportedly more concerned with coronation milestones than with the immediate recovery of the monarch. Harry alleges that he was kept in the dark for months, while senior aides were instructed to wait until the optics were right before moving forward with critical treatment phases. The most unsettling detail Harry has exposed is the existence of a whistleblower within the royal medical team, a senior staffer dubbed the Windsor Nightingale. This individual reportedly risked everything to leak the truth to Harry, documenting how multiple surgery consultations for the king were rescheduled each time under pressure from palace aides citing timing and image. It was this leaked memo, hidden behind outdated x-rays and routine charts, that sent Harry racing back to the UK, only to find that the system had already built a wall between him and his father. Harry describes the feeling of realizing that his father's recovery was being secondary to the palace's desperate need to maintain an illusion of strength. This was the moment the bridge truly began to crumble, leaving Harry to watch from the outside as his family chose legacy over life. Harry didn't just meet a locked gate at Sandringham. He met a wall of cold, calculated resistance. Standing between a son and his ailing father were the men in gray suits, the senior aides and constitutional advisors who have long governed the king's public image with an iron grip. Harry has now exposed that this confrontation wasn't a loud, emotional outburst. It was terrifyingly quiet and clinical. One senior aide, according to Harry's raw testimony, stood with a clipboard that felt more like a shield than a stationary item, telling him point-blank, "Your presence here, Your Royal Highness, is a disruption to the stability we have worked so hard to manufacture." In this part of his exposure, Harry reveals a shocking silent ultimatum that was presented to him in that chilly hallway. He was told he could only enter the king's private quarters if he agreed to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement regarding his father's physical and cognitive state. It was a blatant attempt to bind the son to the same suffocating silence that was already strangling the truth behind palace walls. Harry refused, recognizing it for what it truly was, a trap to ensure that the palace machine maintained total ownership of the narrative, regardless of the king's actual condition. This clash was never about family safety or medical privacy. It was a high-stakes battle over who gets to control the history of King Charles's final chapters. Even more chilling is Harry's claim that this blockade had been meticulously planned weeks in advance. He describes seeing internal memos, classified under the highest level of royal confidentiality, that labeled his potential visit as a high-level security risk to the institutional narrative. While Prince William remained a distant, conflicted figure in the background, caught between his duty to the crown and his bond with his brother, it was Princess Anne who reportedly observed the encounter from the shadows. Harry claims her silence was a deafening confirmation that the monarchical containment protocol was now the only law within Sandringham. The palace wasn't just hiding a sickness. They were hiding a succession crisis that they weren't ready for Harry, or the world, to witness in its rawest form. Just when Harry thought the physical walls of Sandringham were his greatest obstacle, he uncovered a layer of psychological warfare that makes the Camilla blockade look like mere child's play. Harry has now revealed a chilling detail that took place in the dead of night, just hours after he was turned away at the gates. A longtime personal valet of King Charles, a man who has served the monarch for decades and whose loyalty to the man outweighs his fear of the institution, approached Harry in secret. He handed over a sealed envelope, not with a royal crest or formal insignia, but with a simple, shaky handwritten note on the king's private stationery. What Harry read inside didn't just break his heart. It ignited a fire of righteous fury. In the letter, King Charles spoke to Harry not as a monarch, but as a father staring down his own mortality. But it was the misinformation contained in his father's words that exposed the depth of the palace's rot. Charles wrote, "I understand why you are too busy in California to visit, but I hope you know I hold no ill will." Harry was stunned. At the very moment he was pleading with armed guards at the gate to see his father, the king was being told by his senior advisors that Harry had refused to fly over. This was a double-sided lie, a clinical orchestration of isolation designed to ensure that the father and son remained strangers during the king's final hour of need. Harry describes this realization as the moment he saw the bridge not just crumbling, but being actively demolished by the gray suits. The palace wasn't just managing the king's health. They were managing his emotions, feeding him a narrative of abandonment to keep him compliant and reliant solely on the inner circle. Harry's exposure of this letter proves that the monarchical containment protocol extended into the king's very bedroom, silencing the truth even for the sovereign himself. This note was Charles's cry for help, wrapped in an apology for a crime Harry never committed. It confirms the terrifying reality that in the modern monarchy, the machine doesn't just control the news. It controls the family's very heartbeats, ensuring that the legacy of the crown remains untouched by the messy, inconvenient reality of a son's love and a father's regret. As the Camilla blockade tightened its grip around Sandringham, a new and formidable player emerged from the shadows of the royal estate. Prince Harry has now exposed the pivotal role of Princess Anne, the woman often described as the unshakable spine of the royal family. But in this story, her role was far more complex than a mere observer. Harry reveals that Anne was the one who initiated what insiders call the monarchical containment protocol, a strategy designed to prevent the monarchy from falling into total disarray should the king's health fail suddenly. However, even the Iron Princess was reportedly blindsided by the sheer scale of the deception being orchestrated by the senior advisors and the queen consort. The most explosive revelation in this chapter of Harry's exposure is the forbidden dossier, a collection of genuine medical data that Harry managed to view through a clandestine channel just minutes before he was officially escorted off the grounds. This wasn't the sanitized version presented to the Privy Council. This was raw, terrifying clinical truth. The dossier confirmed that the king's rapid cognitive decline was being exacerbated by the very medications being used to keep him vigorous for public appearances. Harry describes a scene where doctors were allegedly being pressured to prioritize the king's ability to look the part over his actual long-term survival. This is the emotional death trap. The emotional death trap, where the person is sacrificed to preserve the symbol. Harry recounts a whispered confrontation he overheard between Princess and a senior palace physician. And, known for her brutal honesty and lack of patience for PR spin, reportedly demanded to know why the Windsor Nightingale's warnings had been suppressed. Her words, as Harry tells it, were chilling. "We are building a monument on a sinking ship, and we're telling the passengers the water is just a mirage." This revelation confirms that even within the highest echelons of the family, there was a fracture, and was trying to save the institution, but Harry was trying to save his father. The palace machine, however, was only interested in saving the optics. Harry's exclusion wasn't just about keeping a son away. It was about ensuring that the only person who would prioritize the man over the crown remained outside the gate, unable to see the rust that was eating away at the king's life. As the clock struck midnight over the sprawling, frost-covered grounds of Sandringham, the physical barriers were replaced by a much more haunting presence. Prince Harry has now exposed a secret meeting that was never supposed to be recorded in the annals of royal history. In the deep shadows of the estate's outer perimeter, away from the prying eyes of the security cameras and the men in gray suits, Harry came face to face with Prince William. This wasn't a formal royal summit. It was a ghost-like encounter between two brothers who once shared everything, but who now stood on opposite sides of a constitutional canyon. Harry describes William not as the confident heir to the throne, but as a man haunted by the weight of a crown he hasn't even begun to wear. The air between them was thick with the scent of pine and the suffocating pressure of royal protocol. Harry reveals that William's face, illuminated only by a distant security light, bore the same grief-hardened expression that their father now carried. But the words William spoke were the true emotional breaking point. Instead of an embrace, William reportedly issued a cryptic warning that felt more like a sentence than a greeting. "You shouldn't have come, Harry," William whispered, his voice strained by the impossible choice between his brother and his duty to the institution. William revealed that he was now a permanent part of the monarchical containment protocol, a cog in the very machine that was keeping Harry at bay. The most devastating part of this exposure is Harry's description of the succession shadow. William allegedly admitted that the palace had already begun drafting the regency papers, documents that would effectively strip King Charles of his power while he was still breathing, placing the burden of the sovereign on William's shoulders prematurely. Harry realized that William wasn't just protecting the king. He was protecting the transition. This encounter exposed the soul fracture of a future king who had been convinced by the senior aides that his own brother was a liability to the stability of the United Kingdom. Harry describes looking into William's eyes and seeing not his brother, but a stranger in a royal mask, a man who had accepted that the machine must survive, even if the family had to be sacrificed to the Camilla blockade. This wasn't a reunion. It was a final, silent goodbye whispered in the dark, proving that the crown doesn't just sit on the head. It consumes the hearts of those who wear it. But the most haunting revelation of this royal reckoning was yet to come. Amidst the chaos of the present-day betrayal, a ghost from the past emerged to speak a truth that had been buried for nearly 30 years. Prince Harry has now exposed the existence of a handwritten note from his mother, Princess Diana, a letter that was long thought destroyed but had been preserved by a silent witness within the royal staff. This wasn't a message of simple maternal affection. It was a clinical, terrifyingly accurate prophecy. Diana had written to her darling boys about a future she feared, a future where illness and ambition would clash inside the crown, and where the weight of the institution would eventually crush the human heart of the sovereign. Harry describes the moment he read those words in the dim light of his temporary residence, realizing that his mother had seen the monarchical containment protocol coming long before it even had a name. The letter spoke of a quiet sickness and a reluctance to speak truth until it is too late. Diana had warned that the day would come when the palace machine would prioritize the symbol of the monarchy over the life of the man wearing the crown. One line in particular sent a chilling shiver down Harry's spine. "He hides more than he admits, and he always has." This wasn't just a critique of King Charles's character. It was an instruction manual for Harry to recognize the patterns of secrecy that were now keeping him from his father's bedside. Diana feared that William would inherit the burden before he inherits the strength. A prophecy that Harry saw fulfilled in the grief-hardened, frozen mask William wore during their midnight encounter. Harry's exposure of this letter proves that the betrayal he is experiencing at the gates of Sandringham is part of a 30-year cycle of silence. The Camilla blockade and the Regency papers are not new inventions. They are simply the final acts of a drama that Diana tried to prevent. Harry describes the letter not as a comfort, but as a battle cry from the grave, urging him to break the suffocating pattern of secrecy that has defined the House of Windsor for generations. This note was the missing piece of the puzzle, confirming that the fracture within the royal family was a legacy passed down in ink and heartbreak. Diana knew that the world wouldn't wait for them to be ready, and as Harry stood in the frozen night, he realized he wasn't just fighting the senior aides or the queen consort. He was fighting a prophecy that had finally reached its expiration date. The ghost of Diana was no longer just a memory. She was a witness to the ultimate failure of the crown to choose family over the machine. The clock at Sandringham House struck midnight, but within those ancient, cold stone walls, sleep was a forgotten luxury. Prince Harry has now exposed a moment that historians will one day call the Royal Reckoning. Despite his failing health and the desperate attempts by the Camilla blockade to keep him sedated and silent, King Charles issued a direct, non-negotiable command, a sovereign summons that sent shockwaves through the royal quarters. Code Monarch Alert was activated. Every immediate family member present on the estate was ordered to assemble in the private library. Harry, still technically barred from the room but receiving real-time updates from his trusted internal source, describes a scene of terrifying atmospheric pressure. This wasn't a family gathering. It was a king preparing for his final war against the very institution that was trying to bury him while his heart still beat. When the heavy oak doors opened, the family, William and Edward and a visibly shaken Camilla, found the king not in his pajamas or a hospital gown, but sitting in full regalia. He wore his sash, his signet ring, and a determination that seemed to pierce right through the physical frailty of his body. Harry reveals that Charles looked immortal yet hollow, a man held together by sheer willpower and the weight of 1,000 years of history. The silence in the room was deafening. Charles opened the proceedings with a voice that cracked with the weight of mortality, but carried the authority of the crown. "What I say tonight, I say as your king and your father," he reportedly began. He confirmed the severity of his neurological condition, finally acknowledging the truth that the senior aides had tried to hide even from him. But then came the shock. He had no intention of stepping down. "I will fight," he declared. "Not for survival, but for legacy." The most explosive moment of this midnight summit occurred when the queen consort attempted to intervene, perhaps to suggest a return to the optics and the safety of the official narrative. Harry reveals that Charles raised his hand in a gesture that was final and absolute. Silence. For the first time in the history of their marriage, the queen consort was publicly and decisively overruled by the king himself. Charles then turned his gaze toward William and issued a command that Harry says shook the very foundation of the building. He demanded unity, not the manufactured unity of a press release, but a genuine cessation of the internal whisper campaigns and the monarchical containment protocols. He spoke of mistakes, decisions that had fractured his relationship with Harry, and admitted, "I have failed some of you, but this moment demands resolve, not regret." This was the king's final act of sovereignty, an attempt to reclaim his family from the machine that had spent decades trying to automate their souls. As the meeting drew to a close, the atmosphere wasn't one of peace, but of a grim, heavy resolve. The king had spoken, and for one final night, the men in gray suits were forced to bow to the man, not the protocol. As the first light of dawn began to bleed across the frost-bitten turrets of Sandringham, a revolution was taking place in the shadows that the world outside could never have imagined. Prince Harry has now exposed a bombshell secret: the activation of the Guardian Protocol, an emergency power structure unprecedented in modern British history. This wasn't just a paperwork exercise. It was a silent, clinical coup, a real-time transfer of power from a fading sovereign to a future king who had grown tired of the palace machine's deceptions. William didn't take this power by force. He took it through a parliamentary decree, fast-tracked under the cover of night, designed to save an institution that was suffocating under the weight of its own lies. Harry describes a chilling scene where William stood before the highest-ranking officials of the state with a cold, terrifying resolve. William reportedly issued a directive that will now be etched into the history books. We must preserve the soul of the crown while its heart still beats. In William's eyes, the heart was King Charles, a man currently isolated and silenced by the Camilla blockade, while the soul was the public's trust and the integrity of the monarchy itself. William made it clear that the era of optics over honesty was finished. He declared that secrecy during a medical crisis was not a form of protection, but a form of institutional betrayal that he would no longer tolerate. The most explosive detail Harry has exposed involves the symbolic and literal seizure of authority. On William's finger, Harry noticed a piece of jewelry that signaled the end of the old guard: Queen Elizabeth's personal signet ring. This ring had not been worn since her passing, and its appearance on William's hand was a silent, undeniable message to every senior aide and advisor. William was now the sovereign in all but name. Through the Guardian Protocol, William established a medical red line, ensuring that all data regarding the king's health was reported directly to him before it could be sanitized by the queen consort or the grey suits. Harry describes his brother not as a grieving son, but as a strategic architect of a new era. William began a quiet purge of the inner circle, bypassing the very advisors who had kept Harry barred from the king's room. Harry realized that William wasn't just protecting their father. He was rebuilding the monarchy so that it could never be hijacked by internal factions again. This midnight shift of power marked the end of the monarchical containment protocol, as Harry knew it. William had claimed the path forward, proving that while the king still wore the crown, the future had already arrived, carved out of the wreckage of their father's silence and a son's determination to rule through truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. As the winter sun finally climbed over the frost-covered horizon of Sandringham, the dust of the royal reckoning began to settle, but the wreckage of the family's soul was left in plain sight. Prince Harry has now delivered the final, most devastating blow in his exposure: the realization that while he may have been physically barred from the king's bedside, he was the only one who truly escaped the gilded cage. Harry describes his final moments on the estate, watching the lights of Sandringham fade in his rearview mirror, knowing that he had done what no one else dared. He had chosen the father over the king. He reveals that the monarchical containment protocol may have succeeded in keeping the public narrative controlled, but it had failed to silence the ghost of Princess Diana, whose words now echoed through the silent halls like a final, tragic verdict. The prophecy Diana wrote nearly 30 years ago, that illness and ambition would clash inside the crown, has been fulfilled to the letter. Harry exposes the haunting symmetry between his mother's struggle and his own. The same men in grey suits, the same Camilla blockade, and the same suffocating demand for optics over authenticity. He reveals that the Guardian Protocol now helmed by William is not a victory for the family, but a surrender to the machine. William has saved the institution, but in doing so, he has become the very thing Harry feared most: a sovereign of silence. Harry describes a final, secret message he received from a palace insider as he reached the airport. The Windsor Nightingale, the whistleblower who started it all, had been officially erased from the royal payroll, her warnings buried once again under a mountain of non-disclosure agreements. This final chapter of exposure ends with a chilling reflection on the future of the British monarchy. Harry claims that while King Charles remains the heartbeat of the crown, the heart itself is now being kept alive by a machine that no longer values the man. The succession shadow has passed, and William now stands on the edge of destiny, wearing their grandmother's ring but carrying a burden carved in secrecy. Harry's closing words in this exposure are the ultimate emotional death point, the final emotional death point for the audience. The crown is heavy, but it is also hollow. He has exposed the real reason he was forbidden from Sandringham, not because he was a threat to his father's health, but because he was the only witness left who could see that the king was being kept a prisoner of his own legacy. As the world reels from these revelations, one truth remains thundering louder than any royal anthem. The monarchy may survive this crisis, but the family as we once knew it is gone, lost in the cold, unyielding silence of the Sandringham night. This is no longer just a royal drama. It is a prophecy fulfilled too late, a crown preserved in ink, but broken in spirit.